Okay, we are talking about shadows and the local color in the shadows and the broken color. And by local color, we mean the basic color that kind of hits you when you first look at a shadow. And basic color, you don't want to look like at this photograph, look at this and try and get too subtle with it. You think, oh, a grayish, bluish, orangey green. Make a definite color choice from the color wheel and make it the right value and the right intensity. When I look at this right away, the first color I think of is blue. I mean, you could get real picky and stare at it and see some red in there, or red, violet, or even green. But I'm going to go with just blue. It's a simple, muted color to start with. And then look also with the shadows, look at foreground shadows, like in here, and then midground shadows, and then background shadows. And if they happen to be kind of the same stuff, like snow, they're going to change a little bit, get a little bit lighter back in here, and a little bit sometimes cooler or slightly warmer. Not a big jump, not a big difference, but you want to at least get the value difference and a little bit of the color difference. Now, I can be a little more choosy with the color, like I could say blue-violet here. Maybe I want to go to a violet back in here, and then maybe a slightly warmer violet. Putting in a basic violet and scrubbing a bit of yellow ochre or orange in it. So I don't have to stick with plain colors, but keep it simple. Don't start mixing 4 or 5 colors to come up with an obscure grayish type of color. Keep it very simple and keep it recognizable. Too often when we have photographs, we try and copy them and the colors just don't work out. Like this is just the dullest looking color I've ever seen. Wouldn't want to mix it. I look at it, it's cool, it's more on the blue or violet side, and that's what I want to go with. Then I can throw in some other colors into it later, but that's the second thing, that's the broken color. So the first is the local. Identify, like this. I would probably identify it as just a darker blue-violet, where this is a lighter blue-violet. Now, shadow on the rocks is a lot grayer, so I can mute it with the complement of blue-violet, which would be a red-orange, something like that, yellow-orange, somewhere in the orange or yellow family. So keep it very simple. Don't get caught up in trying to sneak up on the color or the value. Make a definite, simple statement with the color and the value. And when you judge the value of these shadows, don't stare right at the shadows, because they'll get lighter and lighter. Stare right at the light area next to it, or sometimes the dark area next to it, the darker area. And then you'll see how much lighter this is than the trees, but also how much darker than the snow. And that's what you want to do is compare. We're looking for the difference between the dark and light, not trying to match that value in color exactly. So don't use the photographic color. Have it as a starting place. Again, I see this as a blue-violet. Then it's slightly muted with the complement. Get it the right value. Keep it very simple. Look at these trees. And I could say blue-green or just a cool green. Maybe a bit of a yellow-green, but dark. And yellow-green, of course, we don't think of yellow-green as a real cool color, and it isn't. But if I cool it down a little bit and then make the light areas a lot warmer, then that dark yellow-green will look a little bit cooler, or will look cooler. It'll stay in the shadow. But blue-green would work here. So it doesn't hurt to stay with cooler colors for your shadows, especially since you know you're going to throw color into it in a minute here. So that's the idea of local color. Pick a definite color from the color wheel, get it the right value, and then you can mute it with the complement, at least a little bit. But then the broken color is the color that's in there aside from the local color. Local color, once you get that in there, get it the right value and the right temperature, then you want to break it up with broken color. And that could be anything. Now we do see, this is more of just the photograph. I see some green in here, some violet, blue-violet, a little bit of red-violet. And I want to put that into the shadow, into the local color, and let the local color, or let it blend into the local color and affect it a little bit. I'm not trying to cover up that local color. I don't want to obliterate it. I just want to affect it. So with the broken color, I will mix a color the same value, slightly lighter, and wipe most of it off my brush. So I'm just adding a little bit to these in here. So this would be my look at the local color here. I got a blue violet, got it a little grayer back in here just to show some depth, and a little lighter back in here. And then here's a little bit more grayer violet. So it's a difference, but not much of one. A subtle change to create a little bit of depth in there. Same thing with the shadows on the rocks. Stick with a color from the color wheel. More blue violet here, but gray. And just a basic dark, cooler green. Not quite a blue green yet. There's still some yellow in it. So basic colors for the local. Then for the broken color, you can see in here I got some, let's say the equivalent of Viridian, some Cad Red Deep, maybe Cad Red Deep with a bit of orange, more Viridian or Cerulean, just same color or same value, different color, maybe slightly lighter. I don't want to get it darker because it'll create mud. Same thing in here, I got some orange and the violet, a little bit of green back in here. And with the trees, I've got a reddish orange, a little bit lighter yellow-green, but it sinks into this initial shadow color and it keeps it from looking too light. And the more you play around with this idea, the more variations you get. And at first you'll overdo it and you'll get way too much color in there, or you'll struggle keeping it the same value, slightly lighter. But stay with it because it really helps add life to your shadows. Now, the lighter the shadow, like this snow, the more color you're going to see. The darker the shadow, like these trees, you won't see as much color. A lot of times there's more broken color in the lights, and shadows are kept a bit more simple. But when something is backlit and there's just a lot of shadow, you see mostly shadow in your painting, you're going to have a lot of color, broken color in the shadow. So the next one here, this is a field in the Bighorn Mountains near Sheridan. Big clouds all the time going through there. So these clouds were casting shadows across in here, breaking up the hills nicely. So what I want to do is break these shadows up. Again, a basic value and color. But I have different planes here. I've got the vertical here, vertical, vertical. All of these are vertical. So that's a vertical value. Now, the vertical value can be different values. I can have this tree darkest, mainly because of the type of tree it is. These trees a little lighter, and these trees have both real dark and lighter shadow. But they're all vertical, and they have to be different from the slanted here, and then the flat. So I got a flat, two slanteds, and some vertical shapes. And I want a value separation. And I generally have to push it more than what I see in the photograph. Photograph is not going to do exactly what I need. Even if I'm outside looking at the real thing, sometimes I have to change it to create more depth on my canvas. Remember, our canvas is flat. And a lot of times just copying exactly what we see isn't going to work. We have to create more depth and dimension between these big shapes, these planes. So my first step here is to find a basic color. I've got a cool yellow-green, and this is blue with some white because it isn't real dark. Some yellow and orange, and then probably threw in a little violet just to get a kind of cool it off a bit more. But blue and a little bit of yellow or yellow-orange. Obviously a little more blue than yellow, but enough yellow or orange to warm it up slightly. And this is my cooler blue-green. A lot less yellow, maybe a little bit of red to slightly mute it. But don't get caught up in the color. What I want is a difference between here and the upright trees. As long as I can get that, then the trees themselves, whoops, that's the next stage. the trees themselves over here on the right are darker. The shadows are the deep shadows, the darker shadows are really dark, and then the lighter shadows are still pretty dark compared to the slanted and the flat plane. So I'm separating those values, and it may really get off from the photograph, and I think this does to some degree, but I think it helps. I think it works a lot better than the photograph. It gives me more separation of value between these planes. And go for the extreme. Don't, photograph's too subtle. Start off blasting that difference in there. Get a lot of difference. You can always come back and get subtle towards the end of the painting. So my next step here is to those trees in the middle ground here. I just got some darker trees and then the lighter trees in front. Again, they're both darker than the slanted and the flat because those are different planes. So then my next stage here is to break up the foreground. So then this is the broken color. Some darks in here in the foreground to make that come forward. But these colors, I just want a subtle color change. There's a little bit of value change back in here. These are a lot lighter than the color I started with. You can see what I started with there. Back there's a little lighter. I want it lighter to create more depth back in there. Changing up the colors, some pretty strong viridian or cerulean with just a touch of yellow, some red. And this is done wet into wet. It doesn't have to be wet into wet, but it works so much better. If I have to do it into dry, I'm using dry brush and kind of skipping the brush along. But I want some color change in it. You can see what that does. That adds more depth. And even if we take it down to the photograph here, that adds more depth just by pushing some color difference than the photograph. Photograph has some, you can see it. I want to push it a bit more. It just creates a better, more punch in your painting. And then lastly, I got some lights on the background trees. They're still in shadow, just lighter shadow than that strip of sunlight that's I'm going to emphasize a bit more. But some color up in here, some violets. I'm going to stay fairly cool back in here because it's the distance. These shadows can be warmer because they're foreground shadows. So they're going to be warmer than the background shadows. But all the shadows everywhere are going to be cooler than the sunlight. And that's the key. That's the big difference. I can have variation of temperature within the shadows, but they all have to be cooler compared to the light areas. So looking again at the photograph, you can see the colors pushed more, a little stronger, so it makes more impact. If I just match the photograph, it's really not going to have much impact. But that has more impact. Pushing the value a little bit, and then the local color, and then the broken color. And I'm putting in colors that aren't necessarily there, colors that enhance the painting more. And lastly here, this is more of a backlit, so I'm going to have more shadows. But first thing I want to do again is find the local color. The foreground shadows are cool compared to the sunlit area. But these foreground shadows, compared to the background, are a lot warmer. And that might sound confusing, but within the cool shadows, I want to separate them a little bit. But they all have to be cooler than the sunlit area. And that's what we're after. So this is my block-in color, my local color. I went with a strong violet on the bridge because the color I'm going to put in there is going to be orange, reds, and that'll gray that violet down. So if I start too gray with the violet and then add more warmer colors, it's going to even gray it even more, and I'm going to get a little muddy. So I don't want to do that. So I can keep these colors that I start with, local color. Keep your local color a little stronger, maybe a bit more intense. Don't gray it as much because I know I'm going to come back like I've done there. I've added violets, some yellow greens, some reds and oranges. So I can keep these shadows a little cleaner because I'm going to add colors that are going to gray them down a little bit. Added some orange to the greens back in here. And usually when I get way far away, like distant mountains, distant trees that are mostly blue, I don't add much color to them. They're too far away to see any subtle color changes. So those are usually kept a lot more simple. But again, this enhances the color from the photograph a lot when you think about broken color and local color. Local color first, then broken color. And it's a bit confusing at first, but the more you do it, the easier it becomes. And you learn more if you practice this small first. Do 6x8s, 8x10s, a lot of them, and just practice breaking up the shadows with same value, different color, or slightly lighter and different color. Quickly here, I want to look at a couple of paintings. This is a painting by Edward Pothast. He was an American Impressionist, early 20th century. And you can see a lot of shadows here, like the shadow in here. It's a violet. This might be his local color right there. But then he scrubs in red, violet, some greens, oranges, anything. Doesn't really matter what it is. What he wants is something different. And the initial local color he starts with will hold it together. Same thing in here. And some of them are value changes. The shrubbery are a value change. But the rest are just subtle color change. Some a little bit lighter or darker, but not much. And that really gives the shadows a lot of color. And he's got pretty strong color in here. This red is real strong. And the darks here are pretty dark. But still, he's pushing the color and creating that variation of color in there to kind of create that vibration. Whenever you have like the cool blues there and kind of the yellows and oranges and reds, those vibrate when they're next to each other because they're temperature contrasts. Warm and cools next to each other creates kind of a vibration, and that's always more interesting than just flat. Here, this goes flat. I'm assuming, I haven't seen this painting in real life. I'm assuming there's more color than it looks there. A lot of times the really dark shadows just lose their color in the photographs. Now this is a E. Martin Hennings. He was a New Mexico painter, early 20th century. But you can see the shadows in here. A lot of value change within this shadow. So not a lot of broken color, although you can see it more in here, the blue-greens, red-violets. But it doesn't have to be about rendering anything. It can be just broken color for broken color's sake. You can see it in the light area here a little bit better. It's got kind of a pinkish orange, or orange, some yellow green, and it's all kind of the same value. And that makes it look a lot more sophisticated. Just makes you look like you know what you're doing a little bit better. Just a little bit of broken color in some of these shadows really helps. This is another Edward Pothast, early American Impressionist. You can see the shadows here. This is probably the local color. Then he scrubs in some green, some ochres, a little bit of value change, a little darker, but a lot of color change in here. Really nice color from violet to yellow ochre to kind of green to darker muted violet. But that one overall color holds it all together. And I don't know what it is, that or this, or maybe that color. But you have to start with one. You need something to paint into, to paint the broken color into, to break it up and create some variation. But this takes practice, doing a bunch of them where you're really focusing on just that, just the broken color, finding the local color first, then adding the broken color.